My friend is a psychopath. There were lots of red flags. He was definitely closeted bi, which is fine, but his behavior wasn't. The main red flag is that he had a slew of ruined relationships in his wake. He was a college theater professor and had a pattern of behavior in which he would identify young men in the department who were emotionally vulnerable, often who'd had recent girl trouble and had no current male role model/father figure. Many of them had issues with their dads or their dads were deceased. He would then start spending time with them and love bombing them until they thought they were his best friend. He fed on adoration. I don't even think he exploited all these guys for sex, though he probably did some. He just got off on people adoring him. When they started showing interest in other people, he'd go hard on the discard. There was a pattern of subtly putting these guys down and then building them up so they were conditioned to please him. If he got bored, he threw them aside. He once told me he viewed all his interactions with people through a caricature he created of them. For example, a black friend of ours was the loud black woman. Another friend who'd lost his dad recently and suffering severe depression was Eeyore. He was incapable of self-reflection. If he knew he'd upset you, he'd apologize, but it was always empty. He could not reflect on his actions and actually accept accountability for wrongdoing. He was a budding alcoholic and would attend lectures and rehearsals drunk, then laugh about it later like it was some kind of inside joke. He was a liar. The man was pushing 40 trying to convince these college-aged men he was in his late 20s so they'd hang out with him. He didn't care about your boundaries. At his house he'd regularly expose himself as a joke and acted confused when I didn't find it funny. As one of these guys he love-bombed and emotionally manipulated, I eventually wised up and realized that my relationship with him was not healthy, and that it was not acceptable for him to have the emotional relationships he was having with his fucking 18-year-old students. I cut ties and he went from love bombing to resentment so fast. Later on, my wife and I were visiting some friends who were also friends with him. They'd known him longer than we ever did, and let him stay in their guest room for months when he lost his living arrangements during COVID. They eventually kicked him out and cut ties too. Then they told us they had recently run into a former high school classmate of his who said, "I'm so glad you got away from him. There is something wrong with him. He's dangerous."